Good morning, everyone. If we could have the speakers come up to the stage by turning your camera on. Our panel facilitator is having a little bit of technical difficulties in entering, so we're going to give her just a minute or 30 seconds more to try to join us, and if not, we'll move ahead. All right. Well, still having some technical difficulties for our facilitator, but we are going to move ahead. And I will do my very best to fill in her stead, and hopefully she'll enter in just a few minutes and cut me off and take it from there. But I'm going to kick things off. So welcome everyone to this event and to this panel. We're really excited to be able to host everyone this morning. Really excited, especially about this panel in particular, featuring some of our old and kind of original projects, as well as some new high road who can share about their work and about the things that they've been experiencing in their industry. So we know that service, healthcare, and public sector workers are often on the front lines of crisis. And we've seen this in the past year through climate disasters and the COVID-19 pandemic. And as a result, they're very often the hardest hit by those crises. Work in these sectors is historically undervalued, and this burden is disproportionately borne by Black, Latinx, and other workers of color, immigrants, and women. Our panel today is representing partnerships that have made huge strides towards reclaiming value for these workers in these sectors, driving up wages and job quality, breaking down barriers to access and advancement, and building social capital and work supporting infrastructure within under-resourced communities. For information about their history, structure, and programs, I'll refer you to the background materials that are available in the summit sort of digital packet, the agenda, where you can find bios about all of the speakers. So we're not going to provide extensive bios for everyone because we want to make sure we get to the heart of the discussion. But very briefly, I'll say we have Rebecca Hansen here from the Shirley Ware Education Center and Education Fund, Ron Collins from the Los Angeles Black Workers Center, Aideen Foreman from Hospitality Training Academy, Louis Sandoval from Building Skills Partnership, Corinne Eldridge from the Center for Caregiver Advancement, and Wiley Evans from Dignity Health. Really excited to have all of you join us today. And Joe, if you want to take the slides down, we will kick things off. Fantastic. So we're going to start with Rebecca Hansen of the Shirley Ware Education Center. Your partnership has been breaking down barriers and building career paths for healthcare workers for decades. Will you talk to us about the difference your infrastructure makes for healthcare workers, particularly women, workers of color, and immigrant workers?
Thank you so much, Zach. As Zach mentioned, I'm Rebecca Hansen. I'm the Executive Director of the Shirley Ware Education Center and the SEIU UHW Joint Employer Education Fund. Zach, I'll just quickly use this moment to mention our other panelist, Wiley Evans, is here, but not showing up. So I don't know if there's any troubleshooting you guys can do to get her video on. Just to give you a little bit of background on our infrastructure, the SEA, so we serve a population of 100,000 allied healthcare workers, partnered with 16 employers, including Dignity Health and Kaiser. Our labor management infrastructure lets us reach 100,000 workers directly with working, continuing education, career advancement, and preparing for the future with new skill development. And in 2020, we served 18,000 learners. 80% of them are women. 70% are BIPOC workers, and around 25% are immigrants. Our graduates who move into new jobs earn on average 34% higher wages. And part of the infrastructure that makes this possible is that every day we have a staff of 65 who wake up and think about how to promote and advance non-clinical entry-level workers in environmental services, food service and nutrition, entry-level clinical roles like CNAs and medical assistants, to move into roles like radiological tech, respiratory therapy, nursing, sterile processing, and surgery techs. Worker voice and involvement starts at the level of our board, and later today on the worker panel, you can hear our trustee, Sonia Allen Smith, who is participating on the worker panel. We also continue worker involvement in program development from the early planning stages through program delivery and program evaluation. This takes the form of things like our formal member-to-member program that has around 100 workers who are working directly with their coworkers to outreach and inform about programs and give input, and really serve as ambassadors in the healthcare facilities. We also regularly conduct focus groups, surveys. We have joint apprenticeship councils with worker involvement. All of these things are really, really critical to keeping the worker at the center of the program. Many healthcare workers, and especially women, workers of color and immigrant workers, enter healthcare in any way they can. And so they're overrepresented in entry-level clinical and non-clinical roles, and are looking for opportunities to develop their skills and careers. When we survey our membership, the consistent number one reason that they engage in our services is their desire to learn and grow to reach career goals. This is followed by a close number two, but number two is the desire to increase wages. So they're primarily motivated by So in partnership with the California Workforce Development Board and the HRTP work, we focus on equity, specifically addressing occupational segregation in underserved regions in the Central Valley and Inland Empire. And we're also looking now at the impact, the longer term impact and implications of online education and telehealth on greenhouse gas reduction. At the start of COVID, obviously it's had a huge impact in healthcare. We pivoted to the immediate needs of our workforce, addressing safety and resilience, processing and talking about racism that was happening in their communities and their workplace, and helping them develop social, emotional, and coping skills to get through what has been a very difficult time for all of us, but especially healthcare workers. We also were able to support and move our 18,000 members into online learning, providing laptop lending, digital skills training, coaching, and supportive services to upskill workers in both digital care delivery, work, and learning. And it's so important that we are continuing this work to ensure access to online education and work due to the digital divide. We have seen that entry-level workers through this period of time of COVID are increasingly interested in moving into critical care roles, such as respiratory therapy and nursing that have been so important during COVID. And we've also seen a huge growth in the numbers of workers seeking out digital skills training, because they're both experiencing in real time and anticipating the ongoing impact of telehealth. So that work is really supported by the HRTP and the infrastructure that we've developed to be able to pivot quickly to support workers in this transitionary time. We also really do a lot to try to innovate and build programs that can deliver career advancement. As you may know, in healthcare, only about 10% of allied healthcare workers ever actually move up into higher level clinical roles. And so our earn and learn and competency-based apprenticeship programs remain the best way to address barriers to advancement and to support learners in their need for extended on-the-job training and clinical training. And our partner here from Wiley Evans from Dignity Health, who's also a trustee of our fund, later on the panel is going to talk about how registered apprenticeship really has worked as a win-win for employers and employees. We've also partnered with community colleges and education training providers who have the flexibility to deliver training content that meets industry needs and flexible schedules for working adults who are supporting families. We integrate online instruction with the in-person clinical training. And I just want to finish by highlighting one of our students. So we currently have 300 members of the union in online medical assisting program with San Francisco State University. I want to highlight one of our learners who's 27 years old, a mother of two and a DACA recipient. And she first started in healthcare in 2018, taking a receptionist job at her community clinic where she had been served as a child. Her interest in healthcare is really to ensure that everyone who comes into that clinic is treated with respect and that they matter. And she wanted to advance into clinical roles to continue that work, but she thought she would have to wait until her kids were older. But when we were able to launch an online medical assisting program during the pandemic, she jumped on the opportunity. She loved online classes. She got to interact with other union members from across the state, and she was also able to use the knowledge she already had working in a healthcare clinic to inform her work in medical assisting. So she's now completing her externship with her same employer and has already been offered the MA position when she completes. This is exactly the kind of person that we want working in healthcare, and it's because she can represent her own experience as a woman, immigrant, and person of color that she can bring such good care to her patients. So with that, I will turn it back to Zach.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate sharing the personal stories and kind of the big picture of the work your partnership has done. And I know personally, and I'm sure many guests in the audience have experienced that transition to telehealth and realize what a challenge that's been for the workers and the workforce that have had to adapt to it as well. So I want to turn things to Ron Collins from the LA Black Workers Center. So language in a recent motion by the City of Los Angeles' Board of Public Works mentioned that public sector jobs and careers have been critical lifelines for disadvantaged communities in Los Angeles, especially for Black and Brown communities, women, and other communities of color. So a strong statement coming from the Board of Public Works, but interested to see how that kind of actually manifests in reality. Will you share with us how you're leveraging a partnership there to drive equity in quality public sector jobs?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here. My name is Ron Collins. I use he and they pronouns, and I am the campaign coordinator with the LA Black Workers Center. So first, let me give, for all of you who don't know, I'm going to give a little context about who we are at the LA Black Workers Center and what it is that we do, right? So we're a project we started in the at the UCLA Labor Center in 2009, really to start looking at what was the Black jobs crisis, right? And so when we think about in California, the way in which particularly Black folks are underemployed, there wasn't really anybody working at that specific nexus, right? And so in 2009, we started this project at UCLA, and folks were just like, yeah, how do we actually start to advance things for Black workers? And so that's kind of how we got started. And from there, we moved really into South Los Angeles. And in 2012, probably kind of the thing that really got us moving was working to make sure that we got workers local workers and specifically Black workers working on the Crenshaw line, right? At the time, the Crenshaw line, which goes through in South Los Angeles, predominantly through Black neighborhoods, there were only 1% of workers who were Black who were actually working on the Crenshaw line, and we were able to get that up to 19% of workers, right? And so that's just a little context about like who we are. And really, in terms of this partnership that we built, it really was the beginning of 1,000 Strong, right? Which is a campaign that we have to get 1,000 public sector jobs for Black folks by 2022, right? Which is huge, right? Because when we're talking about public sector jobs, you're talking about largely union jobs, right? You're talking about job security, you're talking about benefits, you're talking about the kinds of jobs that really have a deep meaning for communities and are able to help folks to build generational wealth, right? And so what went into that? And I think for us, the biggest thing that went into that and that we have to really speak on is organizing, right? So for us, it wasn't just building a partnership, it was really doing the organizing work that led to having the 1,000 Strong campaign and really this partnership with the city, right? And when we say organizing, what we mean is like actively going out and lobbying folks like the mayor of Los Angeles, working with other partners to really bring folks in. And part of what we did was really focused on the data, right? So when you're organizing and you're looking to build these kinds of partnerships, one of the best ways that you can really get folks to understand what the problem is and how we're trying to address it is through the data. So when I say focusing on the data, it's looking at certain statistics. Like, so for instance, 38% of all UI claims at the outset of the pandemic were from Black workers, right? And currently, if you look, 85% of Black workers in LA County have applied for some form of unemployment assistance during the pandemic, right? So when you talk about just like the extreme disparity that's happening, of course, COVID has had a huge impact throughout the entire country and the state, but it has really highlighted, I think, for a lot of folks, kind of the disparate impact that we're seeing inside of Black communities. And so when we lean on those kinds of statistics to really show our elected officials and these other folks, I think that's really how we start to build these deeper partnerships to really think about what does a pipeline look like if we're talking about hiring Black workers, right? And so for us, we play definitely the role of connecting folks to those jobs, right? So we find the city's like, hey, yeah, we have these jobs, but we're trying to figure out, where are the Black folks in the city to get them. So a lot of what we do is, one, connecting them with community and also making sure that community has the skills necessary to be successful. So I think one of the things about this partnership too is that we folded into our model around political education and development, right? So it's not just like when we do workforce development, we don't just bring our folks through to get them to a job, but really we give them a level of political education that allows them to really understand the context that they're walking into in terms of being a Black person in the workplace, what are their rights, and the ability to empower other workers. And I think that's important for these kinds of partnerships because as folks get into these public sector jobs, if they're coming in with the context and the understanding of the larger Black jobs crisis, of where we are as a community inside of employment, then it makes it easier for them to really interact in their workplace and to build worker power around some of these issues, right? And so then again, how do we really develop these relationships, right? I think is one of the really key questions. It's like, okay, so you got here, you got this program, but how do you really develop these relationships and how do you make it operational? One of the big things for us was coalition building. Right, so this project really wouldn't be possible if we weren't sitting in coalition with union partners, in particular, and really thinking through, all right, if we have public sector jobs that are coming down the pipeline, right, a lot of those are union jobs, how do we integrate them into the union? How do we really start to think about, how that system works? And I think that one of the reasons that this partnership has been successful and that we were able to really push forward the 1,000 Strong campaign was because we built some of those really strong partnerships. And it's also coming with a plan, right? So the 1,000 Strong campaign really has a plan for thinking about how do we get public sector jobs, right? And really how do we create that pipeline that gets our folks into these jobs? And I think that when you're building these partnerships, it's really important for you to come to elected officials or whomever that you're working with a solid plan for like, hey, this is the actual action that we're going to take, and this is how we're going to do it, right? And then I think part of the success has also been just the focus on the public sector, right? So we started with the public sector. We're definitely in a space now where we're trying to expand, but this particular partnership was really successful because we were starting in the public sector, we worked with the city, and so it was a very direct connection and pipeline. So we knew who we needed to talk to, we knew who we needed to be in partnership with, and when you have that kind of focus, I think it really makes it easy to build and develop those relationships. But again, one of the things that we're thinking about with the 1,000 Strong campaign is how do we expand that, right? We have a model with another model with the county, with private corporations, and how do we get to expand? And I think that that is one of the things that's really interesting and special about the 1,000 Strong project and the way in which we're working is that, you know, while it started in the public sector, there's really a lot of room to be imaginative and to leverage. Hey, we got the city of Los Angeles to commit 400 jobs to us. That does a lot when you go around to private corporations. That does a lot when you go around to the county to say, hey, we want you to jump in on this too. And so I think one of the ways in which this has been successful is really just our ability to leverage the partnerships that we've already built. And you know, I think in closing, one of the things that I really want to kind of hit home is that this work came out of organizing. Right, not necessarily the traditional veins of how we think about workforce development and employment. We didn't necessarily start out with a plan for workforce, but we started out with a plan for organizing, right, and really to run a campaign to get our elected officials to address a crisis. And I think that for our organization, that's just like really important because that is how we build power, right, is through organizing, and that is how we get heard, right. The reason that I feel like the Black job crisis has gone on so long the way that it has is because there haven't necessarily been really strong Black labor voices like the Black Worker Center to bring some of these issues to light. And so can't stress enough how much that this partnership works because we are organizing in our community. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ron. Yeah, and it's really cool to hear about that program and especially just sort of the innovative hiring program out of the public sector, which I think is not something the public sector is known for. I can say that as a public sector employee myself. And yeah, I think really inspiring model. And I think there's a lot of people around the state who could learn from that, who are trying to make an impact in their communities. I want to now turn things to Aideen Foreman. So your partnership at the Hospitality Training Academy is in an industry that has been one of the hardest hit by the COVID-19 crisis, which is hospitality. So can you share with us a little bit about how having the infrastructure that you've built over decades has allowed you to both re-employ workers and serve the broader community through your Serving Our Communities program? And you're on mute, Aideen.
Well, look at me. I was all ready to roll. So hello, everybody. I am thrilled to be here and with, you know, colleagues that have done such amazing work. The hospitality industry was, as everybody can guess, devastated and is finally coming back with the vaccinations that are happening. So the union that we are the labor management partnership with, the Taft-Hartley Fund, although we are our separate 501c3, is Unite Here Local 11. And they lost about 90% of their workforce from layoffs and people who have substantially lost hours. I mean, there were hotels that had never closed and in 40 years, and were closed and it was crazy. On top of it, we had a lot of clients that were in our program in the middle of training when the safer at home orders came, and we had to just absolutely suspend classes. We had workers, we had apprentices, and everybody obviously who are working in the hotels. For example, we had 7 apprentices alone in the Four Seasons Beverly Wilshire when this happened, and that hotel closed and is finally coming back now over a year later. So we are we had to figure out what to do. We just sat around and we were like, we can't do nothing, right? And then we started to hear that the congregate meal sites were closing for the seniors. We started to hear from some of our partners that were domestic violence shelters and slavery and trafficking shelters for those survivors. And we started to hear from homeless organizations saying, you guys have all the big hotels, the convention centers, we need food bad. So we had a session with the union, And then we brought in some of our top general managers and regional labor, like the labor people for the employers. And we said, we got to do something. How many people can we socially distance in your kitchens? How big are your kitchens? We started to get square footage on the kitchens. We started to do all this math because at that point we didn't know whether or not if you touched it, you could get coronavirus from touching a container. We had no idea what the science was at that point. Obviously now we know it's a droplet aerosol COVID infection situation, but it was different then. So we started working with our employers. We put together a proposal for the state of California, got a master service agreement from the Department of General Services, which if any of you have ever tried dealing with getting a master service agreement, it is you could kill yourself. But we finally got it done through being up till 2 a.m, redoing and redoing and redoing and redoing. I think we got it, and so did Jose Andres' World Central Kitchen. So we were really proud that we got up there with them. Also, a little bit of help with Julie Sue and helping us navigate the state was critical. So a big shout out to Julie as always. And we, also talked to our WIB partners, the LA City WIB, Greg Irish and his staff, Victoria and the rest have been incredible in working with us. We got our employers together. We put together a program. We got approved. We got funding from the state. Well, actually not the state, through Great Plates Delivered. We got Project Room Key, City of LA, County of LA, Homeless Authority. We are now at, to this date, over $45 million in government funding for that program. We've served almost 3.7 million meals as of now. We have brought 1,100 workers back to work. And that includes not only union workers, but management from the employers. Of course, even the GMs are getting money out of this and all that. And we brought back taxi cab and shuttle drivers on top of it. So that is 10,000 people that are continually getting meals from us, along with, as I said, these domestic violence shelters and the rest of it that just did not have the budget to provide as much food as was needed because a lot of these workers were working, so they didn't have to account for their food. Our proud partners on this have been USC, Pomona College, the LA Convention Center, Levy Restaurants, Ritz-Carlton, JW Marriott, Sheraton Grand, Westin Bonaventure, the Beverly Hilton, all of that. It has been incredible. On top of it, we got a shout out in the red carpet of the Grammys, the Golden Globes, and they gave us a donation from the Golden Globe Foundation because their event was usually held at the Beverly Hilton, and they had some extra money because they didn't have to hold the event. So we've gotten foundation support, we've gotten all kinds of support to bring these workers back to work. And that really, Zach, is how I think is really the beauty of the labor management partnership. We have great relationships with our union employers. Even if the union is fighting with them, we're separate. We still do our program. We still roll it. And, they are more than ever saw the value of working with the HTA and now, are dedicated more than ever dedicated to hiring directly out of our program for the people we train. We're super excited to now finish up our last cohort in particularly culinary that we postponed due to safer at home. We're getting ready to launch a brand new one in July to get back to work in the kitchens, maybe at a reduced capacity. We'll see where COVID is then, obviously requiring, vaccinations and the rest of it so that it's a safe environment. But it really is the beauty of HRTP that's giving us ways to communicate with workers. I will say in HRTP, for example, we have an app that we use to move workers around, and that was tremendously helpful during the pandemic to talk to workers. There were times when there were protests and workers couldn't get to work. They had to use separate entrances. The buses were down. It was really a communication device for us that through that app, we were able to really boost our serving our community program.
Great, thank you for sharing, Aideen. And that has really been one of the feel-good stories of the pandemic in an otherwise, I think, very difficult time. And really excited to have one of the workers who was put back to work through the Saving Our Community program, who's going to be joining us for the Worker Roundtable with Secretary Sue. So everyone, please, stick around for more on that. I want to turn things now over to Luis at BSP. Building Skills Partnership has been an innovator in improving job quality for frontline service workers in an industry that has really been historically undervalued and underrecognized, and doing that through skills certification and career pathway programs. So can you tell us a little bit about how these strategies that you've been sort of implementing for many years actually improve job quality for workers in your partnership?
Yeah, well, good morning, everyone. I just want to thank you and the California Workforce Development Board for inviting me to participate in this panel. I want to thank Zach and Pam, who's not here, but we have been working closely with to make this session happen. So BSP is a labor management nonprofit that represents about 75 responsible employers and contractors across the state. These are employers that provide employment in the janitorial industry, around building, also 40 building owners, as well as California's largest janitorial union, which is SEIU USWW. So each year we train approximately 5,000 property service workers. That includes in workforce development and immigrant integration. Largely, we serve Latino immigrant workers. I would say about 90% of them are immigrants from Latino America, Latin America. Largely are women workers as well, and limited English and learners, as well as we have a huge need around digital skills. We provide quality workforce development programming, such as the Green Gen Education Program, which I'll speak about today, as well as the infectious disease certification that came about from the COVID-19 timeframe. We also provide emergency preparedness to workers at LAX, as well as other wraparound services such as health and wellness, parent engagement, and much more. And part of our framing is that we need to not only uplift and provide workforce development programming, but also quality of life programming that a lot of the immigrant workers that we interact with need. Through the contributions from the industry negotiated by workers and union, we are able to provide training and engage partners and the foundations to support our work. That's super critical for us, because through working through collaboratively with partners and funders, we really identify how to support workers and the industry, really looking how can we insert the voice of workers and workforce development. And I think about strategically about how we leverage our relationships with labor management to reimagine the industry and raise the floor within the industry. I think that's something that we've been really strategic about, particularly during the COVID-19 timeframe, really looking at how do we, solidify our working relationship with labor management to think about career ladders and career pathways for workers. Even before the pandemic hit, California's property service workers, and I'm lumping them both janitorial and airport workers, made up a very vulnerable demographic, mostly immigrant, limited English proficiency, lack of access to formal education. And again, because of the low pay within the industry, many of them have multiple challenges accessing training because they have 2 or 3 jobs. Our model takes training to them because we are able to work with labor and management to provide training at their workplace. Their work is often too undervalued and underserved and underappreciated. So, I think that COVID-19 really brought to the forefront the value of frontline workers and how critical they are and how critical immigrant workers are. And I hope that, as we're having this conversation about, talking about frontline service workers and reclaiming value, I think we also need to recognize them, right, through how professional they are and the added value that they add to the different industries that they represent. I think right now, more than ever, we must invest in solutions that address this win-win-win solution that help uplift workers and help workers towards career mobility. For us, we've been working on a journey that really started since, I would say, 2007, about how do we think about bringing the different sectors, both janitorial, building owners, as well as the union, to think about how do we create career mobility and career pathways through training. Largely, that has been centered around vocational ESL and the Green Gen Education Program, which I'll speak a little bit about. So, since the start of BSP, even when Aida was the executive director, who she spoke earlier, which, she passed the mantle, we have approached our work through a win-win lens, and the win-win lens is this high road, training partnership model. How can we add value to the industry, address the needs of workers and the industry? That's, how we look and how we approach the work. Through this high road, partnership model, we're able to address immediate training needs of vocational ESL, infectious disease, the green cleaning through Green Gen Education Program. So I think the Green Gen Education Program really exemplifies how we can add social equity through training and workforce development. Why? Because we're able to bring everybody, particularly workers who have been disenfranchised, disconnected from the conversation about green and sustainability, and bring them to the table about how do we make sure that we address both the cleaning and the maintenance of green buildings, but how do we also reduce the carbon footprint of buildings, right? So bringing janitors into the conversation becomes critical, because who does all the cleaning in those buildings? Janitors. So they often know really what is taking place. This is a partnership that we have with the USGBC Green Buildings Council, USGBC LA, the Building Owners Management Association of Greater LA. And the program really exemplifies, I think, how we could come together to really address not only workforce development, address, the equity component of making sure that we're addressing sustainability needs, but also making sure that we address the interests of building owners and employers to making sure that we address energy efficiency, recycling, waste management, water conservation, and other green cleaning practices. I think going back to your point of what you mentioned and how you phrased the question, I think, as we're thinking about COVID-19, and I think a lot of our practices, we've learned a lot as BSP, and I want to, give a shout out to our wonderful team, across the state, that I think, it's what makes and it's the glue to what makes our program so successful. They're in tune to the needs of workers, they're in tune to the needs of the industry, they're in tune to the needs of our partner union. And, we've been having a lot of conversations with our partners, through our labor management committees. Early on in the pandemic, we developed a statewide labor management committee to bring in our partners to really try to understand how is this industry responding as they're shutting down things. How do we make sure that we understand where the industry is going, but also how to protect workers, right? Because it's also about that worker voice as we're thinking about equity and we think about how we move forward. So through that conversation, it really led us to understand the industry. And then there was a really big need for us to not only cement our training around green, but also around infectious disease. So over the last year, we developed an infectious disease certification with UCLA and UC Berkeley and industry partners. And, to date, we've trained about 800 workers. We're expecting to train a little bit more than 1,000 workers by the next, quarter. And I think that's a testament not only to bringing partners together, understanding that, this is their value in training, but also that frontline workers need to be recognized for the professionalism that they goes into their job. I think as we move forward, I think, many of us are excited that we see hope and we see California moving in the right direction in terms of COVID. We hear that, that we're going to, re-enter buildings. We hear that, we're going to reopen, right, the economy. I think, what I push us to think about is, what is the normal going to look like, right? And I'm not really interested to going back to the normal. I'm really interested in how do we reimagine how we re-engage with workers and how do we reimagine a new industry, right? This is an opportunity. If we're really valuing frontline workers and we're really valuing, the contributions that they make every day to keep us safe and keep our buildings safe, then we also have to honor, right, through training, through wages, and through making sure that they're safe, right, at the workplace, the work that they do. So this is a conversation that we've been, very closely with our labor partners. We've been very close with our, partners who are employers and building owners to make this happen, right? And so we've been engaged in conversations over the last 6 months around a career lattice framework that does that. We hope to share more over the next couple months, but it's really like, how do we can take an opportunity really to think about how to reimagine an industry that really supports workers, that is also grounded around just and equitable recovery for all workers, right? And I think that's how we're approaching this work.
Yeah, thanks so much, Luis. And I think as we're all having a lot of discussions on what a just recovery is and what it looks like, we can really look to projects like yours, your organizations, and the work you're doing, as well as many of the other panelists here, of kind of what the blueprint might look like for what a real just recovery really looks like. I just want to briefly mention we're running a little short on time. We're supposed to end this at 10:15, but the next panel does not start till 10:30. So I'm going to use my executive authority to make sure that both of our next speakers get enough time to speak to just kind of blow through the 10:15 time cap. So yeah, just no worries about making sure we get everyone a chance to speak. And so do you want to turn it over to Corinne Eldridge from the Center for Caregiver Advancement? As I'm sure everyone is well aware, the COVID crisis, is really impacted the long-term care sector and is one of a long history of crises that are disproportionately borne by undervalued workers and undervalued sectors and undervalued communities. The ongoing climate crisis is another one of these. So can you tell us a little bit about your partnership's plans to build a caregiver resiliency model for climate-related disasters?
Sure. Thanks so much, Zach. Thanks for having me, and thanks to the California Workforce Development Board. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Caregivers have expressed an urgent need for a caregiver resiliency program as they have increasingly found themselves as both essential workers and first responders during disasters that threaten their consumers and residents, and that's without having sufficient training. So at the Center for Caregiver Advancement, our mission is to build the workforce of highly trained caregivers as a critical component of California's support network for seniors and people with disabilities. So we train IHSS caregivers and skilled nursing facility workers. And this program will teach caregivers how to prepare for, respond to, and recover from climate-related emergencies and disasters. Our partnership is built between SEIU Local 2015, our union partner, workers, and employers to advance the mutual goals of identifying strategies to augment IHSS caregivers and skilled nursing facility workers' skills in their roles as essential workers and first responders, which will impact both the quality of their jobs and the quality of care for consumers and residents. And we know that climate-related emergencies, fires, power outages, extreme weather like heat in Los Angeles, earthquakes, pandemics, and maybe things that we don't know about yet are really inevitable in California. And the negative impact, as you said, has really been great. Nursing home and home care workers. And we've seen this play out during the pandemic with these workers and communities of color really bearing a disproportionate share of the burden of the COVID outbreaks. The majority of the care workers with whom we work are designated as HRTP priority populations, and that they are low-income communities and they're most impacted by the environmental pollution. So our curriculum will be a multi-module program where we'll, aside from the essential caregiving skills, we'll have basic educational training on climate change, both causes and risks. We're going to borrow from the framework of CERT, Certified Emergency Response Training, and get input from subject matter experts in disability rights and access, because the access and functional need population is really critical and prevalent in this population. And our specialized training curricula, it will respond to the needs of both workers and employers with an intentional focus on climate impacts. So, improve safety and security on the job for both the workers themselves and the residents and consumers, reducing barriers to providing care during a disaster, and building more inclusivity for seniors and people with disabilities. And in the long term, with the partnership developing a sustainable long-term structure for skilled nursing facility and home care workers to be able to better respond to emergencies and disasters. And our workers are really spread out throughout the state. And so our team does some really incredible work to be able to support them and bring them the tools that are needed to access our training programs. They are an incredibly diverse set of workers representing many different cultures and many different language groups. And our team does an incredible job. And during COVID, we had to pivot to moving everything online. So we have instructor-led online Zoom classes, and our recruitment has shifted to digital recruitment too. So, text messages, e-blasts, and we have reverted to good old-fashioned telephone calls, which have also been really useful. And we've built a really robust system so that way we can bridge the gap in digital literacy, which we know that some of our workers have. So the team has built online tutorials, videos that help the workers download the Zoom app, and extended office hours for our instructors. And our field team is able to then have one-on-one time with our workers who may need some extra assistance. So that way we ensure that those who need it have that support to be able to access the training. And then we also have staff in other parts of the state. And of course, our network of caregivers are really an incredible part of supporting and getting the word out for our programs, because their word of mouth and the networks that they have of talking to other caregivers in their communities is really pivotal. And we're able to leverage that in order to build our programs out. And, you know, this has been touched on in, I think it was Lisa's comments, but long-term care, as I think most people know, is another industry that has been an undervalued workforce. And there's an economic strain that is really on top of a really demanding job. And so we see training as part of the solution to lift up workers in this industry. And, you know, the caregiving workforce is predominantly women, predominantly made up of women of color and immigrants. And they have been caught in the crosshairs of both structural racism and structural sexism for decades, making this an invisible workforce for far too long. And so they are very much underpaid and have limited access to training and career advancement opportunities. And so if they want to advance, they actually have to leave the industry. So as we think about this program, we see training as one component to building quality jobs, and with the critical need to improve wages and benefits. And that this program is a specialization in resiliency, where every student, along with their skills, receive an economic enhancement upon completion of their training. And that helps lay the foundation for conversations about long-term wage increases, because they're bringing these enhanced skills to the larger healthcare system. And this is really part of our larger vision to build career pathways within long-term care, within home care, so that these incredible women who do this very difficult work every day have opportunities to advance. And this collaboration will support the goals of job quality, equity, career pathways, and advancement, and really laying the foundation for sustainable structural change.
Thanks so much, Corinne. And I think one piece you're touching on there that was sort of been highlighted in a couple of the other panelists so far is how I think people sometimes talk about green jobs, and we always think of like energy workers or solar panel installers or something. And I think, you know, we all recognize how every worker has a role to play in that energy transition, and protecting the planet. And we've seen in California with wildfires and smoke and power shutoffs how important it is that long-term care workers are sort of, you know, a part of that, part of being an adaptable and resilient workforce and communities. So really appreciate the work you're doing there. Lastly, but certainly not least, wanted to turn to Wiley Evans with Dignity Health as an employer partner with the Shirley Ware Education Center. And as an employer who is deeply invested in a mature high road training partnership, you can understand the advantages of the strategies that our panelists have been describing, of a connected worker and community infrastructure, of having on-ramps and pathways and worker supports for underrepresented communities, and having structures to solve very difficult problems. Will you talk to us a little bit about the value of these partnerships, kind of from that employer perspective, what the value you see as an employer?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, my major partner is Rebecca Hansen, and we're sort of bookending this this presentation. So yeah, I'm working with Dignity Health. Dignity Health, for those of you who have a hospital, you know, we are the Hello Human Kindness, well-branded hospital healthcare system. We have about 35 acute hospitals and dozens of other clinical and operations. And we also have a really well-established partnership and relationship with our unions, one of which is SEIU UHW, which is how we have a connection with the Shirley Ware Education Center and the Education Fund. Just some little statistics, because as we talked, I kind of looked it up. 71% of our members for UHW are women, and about 2/3 of those members are identified as non-white. So we're definitely in that wheelhouse and very important population to focus on. And I think when there's a lot to talk about when we talk about partnerships, and I don't think this effort would be successful without that partnership. And especially without the credibility that Rebecca Hansen's group brings, the professionalism, the agility, the credibility, and just help. This is work that I certainly couldn't do. It's not in my wheelhouse, and certainly not the focus of what Dignity Health does. But together, we work together and focus on these partnerships with schools that we wouldn't have. So best practices that we may not have our eyes on, the research and the partnerships we've, through the last few years, we've been in touch with other education funds across the United States. We've been in touch with other employers, how do you do this? So we're not recreating the wheel, and that's one of the big things that this partnership brings together. The biggest part of the partnership, that as far as I wanted to talk about, so the pluses and some of the barriers, the pluses inevitably is the effect and the impact on the operation and our employees. The satisfaction of bringing those two together and getting that fit is, I could keep going and talking about that, but there's a direct relationship to retention and just the engagement of our employees, the mobility, people being able to use their education and their skills and get a better job, which is essentially what our goal is. And the partnership with the Ed Fund and the Shirley Ware Education Center really just fills that gap, really brings a necessary partner to the table to help us, do what we need to do with our workers and our management teams. Some of the barriers, and I'm cognizant of the time, some of the barriers, and it's probably not going to be new to most people in this group, is making that, instead of a love connection, making that job connection, making sure that our employees who are getting the skills and upgrading in the education, making sure that there's a job, and connecting at the right time with our management teams and our departments to make sure that there's a job to go into. In a lot of areas, we are good at this. We kind of plan, and that's, especially in this last year, it's really hard to think future when you're, putting out the fire in front of you. But really, when you get to a department and they talk about their needs in a year, and we talk about, all right, well, we can solve this by an apprenticeship, which is something that we're knee deep into right now. That's eventually where we want to go. But it's not where all our managers and all our departments and all our facilities are at right now. And we're really trying to connect with the enlightened manager to make sure that they understand, the power of educating their teams, even if they were to lose somebody to another department. And sometimes that is a big pain point for our managers. So really enlightening them to the power of the work that we're doing. I mentioned we're in the midst of a medical coding apprenticeship, and it's many, many months long. It's about 9 months long. And there are some real tactical issues that poses for an employer. Things like wage replacement, backfilling. When you're talking about taking, 10, 15, 20 people offline and training them, that leaves a very, very noticeable gap. And trying to negotiate that with some of our managers, sometimes we're more successful than others, but sometimes when you're talking about taking that one, surge tech off the floor at one facility, that, and then they are the linchpin of that department, it can be hard. So those are some of the barriers that that I face and that I work closely with the Ed Fund to get over. And then a lot of times it's making sure members know what they're entitled to, and making, They talked at the beginning of the presentation in the open session about understanding the needs of our workers and understanding the needs of our managers and finding those fits. And it's not easy because we have about 18,000 members with UHW between California and Nevada, and understanding where they're at, what they can do, where they want to go, and then finding the manager and making that job connection is not always easy. My approach with the Ed Fund, and Rebecca and I have talked about this at nauseum, is just, getting small wins and building on those wins, and gaining that credibility. And thankfully, the Ed Fund and the Shirley Ware Education Center, they bring that knowledge, that know-how, and that expertise. It's certainly not in my wheelhouse, so it's appreciated. So a lot of times I feel like just the air traffic control and matchmaking between the right people and the right employees and with the union. Again, I could probably go on and on about anecdotal stories and some really feel good things. But I think it's probably every week I get an email from one of our apprentices that are really thankful to me. And in fact, I'm just like connecting, making connections, but ultimately the impact on the workers, wherever they are in their, career, is overwhelming. It really feels good. It's the right thing to do. And I can't underestimate that impact. So I'm rushing through a lot of content. Probably said half of what I really wanted to say, but Zach, for the sake of time, I'm going to hand it over to you, and maybe if there's any time for questions. So.
Thank you so much, Wiley. And I think your comments really demonstrate, like many of our panelists, just the value of partnership and willingness on both sides to kind of come to the table to solve problems together. I am going to wrap things up quickly because we do have our worker panel starting in 3 minutes that I'm supposed to be helping coordinate. So this is sort of for me. And I really appreciate all of you taking the time to share today, and our audience for sticking through us a little bit long. I think we were gaining attendees as the session went on. So really, really happy that you're able to join us today and share from some of these really, really strong partnerships, and can hear the impact on real workers. And for more of that, to hear from actual workers themselves, I would encourage everyone to please leave this session. We're going to go out of the present mode and rejoin the main session. There'll be a little button on the right-hand part of the screen that you can select. Joe is going to share us with a little picture. Oh yeah, feel free to tweet about us today. So we're going to end the presentation. Please join the main session for our worker roundtable starting in Julie Sue. Thanks again for everyone for joining, and we'll see you all shortly.